The cockpit was a cacophony of alarms and flashing lights. Captain Alyssa Vance struggled against the G-forces as her ship, the Lumen Voyager, hurtled toward the surface of the planet below. Sparks erupted from shattered consoles, and smoke coiled around her as she wrestled with the controls, trying desperately to stabilize the descent. The starship had taken heavy damage in an ambush by a rogue pirate fleet, its hull breached in several places. The enemy had disappeared into hyperspace, leaving Alyssa alone with a crippled vessel and no hope of calling for backup. Her knuckles were white as she gripped the control stick, her jaw clenched tight. The planet looming in her viewport was Dracoris, an uncharted world that had never been explored, at least not officially. It was her only option. The alternative was disintegrating in orbit. "Come on, you stubborn piece of junk," Alyssa muttered through gritted teeth. She slammed a fist against the navigation panel, which flickered uselessly. The ship bucked violently as it tore through the atmosphere, its outer plating peeling away like dead skin. As the ground rose to meet her, she braced for impact. The crash was cataclysmic. Metal groaned and twisted as the Lumen Voyager plowed into a dense forest, tearing through trees and leaving a trail of scorched earth in its wake. The force of the landing threw Alyssa against her restraints, snapping them with a loud crack. She hit the console hard, pain flaring in her side as the air was knocked from her lungs. When the world finally stopped spinning, she lay motionless for several moments, dazed and disoriented. The silence that followed was almost deafening, broken only by the faint hiss of escaping gas and the distant cries of alien wildlife. Alyssa groaned, forcing herself to move. Every inch of her body protested, but she couldn't afford to rest. She checked herself for injuries, a deep gash on her forehead, a dislocated shoulder, and likely a few cracked ribs. Her flight suit was torn and smeared with blood. She reached for the emergency medkit strapped beneath her seat and fumbled for a pain suppressant. The cool sensation of the auto-injector brought temporary relief, but she knew she was far from safe. The ship's interior was a wreck, its corridors filled with debris and sparking wires. Alyssa grabbed a utility belt and a portable scanner before exiting the mangled craft. The moment she stepped outside, she froze. The world around her was unlike anything she had ever seen. Massive trees stretched into the sky, their branches glowing faintly with bioluminescent patterns. Strange plants pulsed with an otherworldly energy, casting soft hues of blue and green across the forest floor. The air was dense and humid, carrying a metallic tang that hinted at the planet's alien nature. In the distance, mountains jutted into the sky like jagged teeth, their peaks shimmering as if dusted with starlight. Alyssa took a tentative step forward, her boots crunching on a carpet of iridescent moss. Her scanner whirred softly, its readings chaotic and incomprehensible. The atmosphere was breathable but charged with particles her equipment couldn't identify. Suddenly, the ground beneath her trembled. She stopped, her heart pounding. The shaking grew stronger, accompanied by a deep, guttural rumble that seemed to come from all directions. The forest fell silent as if holding its breath. Then she saw them. They emerged from the shadows, one by one, their enormous forms illuminated by the glow of the forest. Dragons, but not like the ones from Earth's myths. These creatures were otherworldly, their elongated bodies covered in shimmering scales that reflected light like living prisms. Their eyes glowed like twin suns, and their wings were vast and translucent, etched with intricate patterns that looked more like circuits than veins. The largest of them, a towering beast with sapphire scales, stepped forward. Its massive claws left scorch marks on the ground as it moved, and the air around it seemed to hum with energy. Alyssa's breath caught in her throat. She stumbled backward, her injured body screaming in protest. The sapphire dragon lowered its head, its glowing eyes fixed on her. The others circled slowly, their movements deliberate, their intentions unclear. Alyssa's hand twitched toward the blaster at her side, but she hesitated. What was the point? Even at full strength, she wouldn't stand a chance against creatures like these. She sank to her knees, her vision swimming. "Is this how it ends?" she whispered, her voice trembling. After everything. Is this it? As if in response, the sapphire dragon tilted its head and let out a low, resonant growl. The sound wasn't just noise, it was a vibration that seemed to pass through her very soul. For a moment, she thought she could hear words within it, faint and indistinct, like a whisper carried on the wind. And then the smaller 1A ruby-scaled dragon approached cautiously. It sniffed at her wounds, and Alyssa flinched, expecting pain. But instead, the creature's claws emitted a faint glow. Warmth spread through her body, and the edges of her vision sharpened. The throbbing in her side lessened, and the gash on her forehead began to close. What are you doing? Alyssa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The sapphire dragon stepped closer, its luminous eyes meeting hers. For the first time, she didn't see a predator. She saw something far more complex, something intelligent. The same resonant vibration filled the air, and this time, she understood. You are not an invader. You are hurt. Why have you come to our sacred home? Alyssa blinked, trying to make sense of the impossible. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The sapphire dragon's gaze didn't waver. And then, before she could answer, the forest trembled again, this time with a different kind of energy. A distant shadow loomed, blotting out the faint glow of the horizon. Alyssa felt it in her bones, a presence, vast and malevolent, approaching from the edge of the world. The sapphire dragon turned its gaze toward the shadow, its scales darkening. When it spoke again, its voice carried a note of urgency. Your arrival was not chance. The ancient darkness stirs. Alyssa's breath quickened. She looked at the dragons surrounding her, their expressions grim and watchful, and she knew one thing for certain. She had crash-landed into something far greater than herself. The air around Alyssa seemed to vibrate with unspoken tension. The sapphire dragon, whom she would later call Zephyr, stood motionless, its glowing eyes locked on the distant shadow creeping across the horizon. The others remained silent, their jewel-like scales dimming slightly as if mirroring their leader's mood. Alyssa sat on the ground, her injuries mostly healed, but her mind churned with fear and confusion. The alien creatures, these Draker, had chosen not to kill her. Instead, they spoke, not with words, but through vibrations, resonances that reverberated within her mind and body. She struggled to make sense of it, clutching the scanner in her hand like a lifeline. Ancient darkness? What does that mean? She whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The sapphire Draker turned its head toward her, and the hum in the air intensified. Alyssa felt the vibrations in her chest, forming a response not in words, but in raw meaning, the Voidborn. It consumes light, devours worlds. You are bound to it. Alyssa's heart skipped a beat. Bound to it? I don't even know what you're talking about. Her voice cracked with desperation. I'm just a pilot. I was attacked, forced to crash here. I don't belong in your war. Zephyr moved closer, lowering its massive head until it was level with hers. The warmth from its shimmering scales radiated outward, a stark contrast to the cold dread building in her chest. You carry its mark, came the resonant reply, this time clearer, sharper. But you also carry the light. For the next several hours, Alyssa's world became an incomprehensible blur of questions and revelations. The Draker guided her away from the wreckage of her ship, deeper into the bioluminescent forest. The further they went, the more alive the planet felt. The trees pulsed with faint light, their rhythms matching her footsteps. Rivers of liquid energy snaked through the land, their currents glowing with a spectral radiance. It was beautiful, but the sense of foreboding never left her. Zephyr spoke sporadically, explaining that Dracoris was not just a planet, it was a living entity, connected to its guardians, the Draker. The Voidborn, an ancient entity of unfathomable power, had long sought to consume Dracoris and its light. For centuries, the Draker had held it at bay, but now the balance was shifting. Why me? Alyssa finally asked, her voice filled with exhaustion. She stumbled over a root, catching herself on a glowing vine. Why would the Voidborn care about me? Zephyr paused, its massive body coiling slightly. The vibrations that followed felt almost mournful. Your kind is scattered across the stars. Some carry light, others shadow. Few hold both. Fewer still survived the crossing. Alyssa's brow furrowed. The crossing? What is that? Another Draker, the ruby-scaled one who had healed her earlier, let out a soft, almost musical sound. The vibrations formed a response she could barely grasp. Your escape from death. It marked you. It left a wound. Alyssa's mind reeled. She thought back to the ambush, the chaos of the attack, the moment her ship had been hit by a strange, pulsating weapon unlike anything she'd seen before. It hadn't just been damage, it had felt as though the weapon reached into her, tearing at something deeper than flesh. So, what? The Voidborn attacked my ship because of this? She gestured vaguely at herself. I don't even know what this light and shadow stuff means. Zephyr rumbled, a low sound that Alyssa interpreted as patience wearing thin. You are a bridge. A convergence. The Voidborn fears you. And so, it seeks to consume you. Alyssa sat heavily on a rock, staring at the ground. The Draker's words made no sense, yet deep inside, she felt an unsettling resonance with them. She had always felt different, drawn to light and dark in equal measure. Her decisions as a pilot, her instincts, they had always skirted the line between reckless courage and calculated risk. Okay, she said finally, looking up at Zephyr. Let's say I believe you. What now? How do I stop it? The Draker led her to a clearing where a towering crystal spire jutted from the ground, its surface glowing faintly with an inner light. The air here was thick with energy, and Alyssa felt her hair stand on end as she stepped closer. Zephyr circled the spire, his claws carving symbols into the soft earth. The other Draker joined him, their movements deliberate and synchronized. This is the convergence, Zephyr explained, his voice more intense than before. A place where light and shadow collide. Here, you will learn to harness the energy within you. Alyssa hesitated. Learn to harness it? I don't even know what it is. The ruby-scaled Draker approached, lowering its head to nudge her forward. Alyssa stumbled but obeyed, stepping closer to the spire. As her hand touched its surface, a shock of energy coursed through her, and her vision blurred. She was no longer in the clearing. Instead, she stood in a vast void, surrounded by swirling light and darkness. Tendrils of shadow reached for her, but threads of light pushed them back, creating a delicate balance. She felt the Voidborn's presence, a cold, suffocating force, but she also felt something else, warmth, determination, and the faint, flickering light of hope. Her instincts took over. She reached out, drawing the threads of light toward her, weaving them into a barrier against the encroaching darkness. The shadows hissed and recoiled, but they did not retreat completely. When Alyssa's vision cleared, she was back in the clearing. The Drakers surrounded her, their eyes glowing brighter than before. You have begun, Zephyr said, his voice tinged with approval. But the Voidborn's power is vast. You must grow stronger. You must become the bridge. For the next few days, Alyssa trained with the Draker. They taught her to attune to the rhythms of Dracoris, to draw strength from its living energy. She learned to sense the balance of light and shadow within herself, to amplify the light when the shadow threatened to overwhelm. But the shadow was always there, lurking at the edges of her mind, a reminder of the Voidborn's growing presence. One night, as she sat alone by a glowing stream, she felt a familiar vibration. Zephyr approached, his massive form moving silently despite his size. He lowered his head, and she reached out, placing a hand on his warm, gleaming scales. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. What if I fail? Zephyr's eyes glowed brighter, and the hum in the air grew stronger. You carry both light and shadow. That is your burden. But it is also your strength. You cannot fail, Alyssa. for if you do, we all fall." The weight of his words settled over her, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she nodded, determination hardening in her chest. She would fight. She would learn. And when the Voidborn came, she would be ready or die trying. The days on Dracoris passed in a blur of relentless training and an ever-growing sense of urgency. Alyssa pushed herself beyond exhaustion, honing the abilities the Draker insisted were essential for the coming battle. Her initial skepticism had long since faded. The Voidborn's presence wasn't a distant threat anymore, it was an oppressive force growing stronger with every passing moment. The planet itself seemed to sense the encroaching doom. The luminous glow of the forest dimmed. Rivers of radiant energy began to stagnate, their once brilliant currents clouding with black tendrils. The air grew heavy, thick with an unnatural chill. Even the Draker, proud and imposing as they were, became quieter, their movements more deliberate. The ancient guardians of Dracoris knew their time was running out. Alyssa sat in the shadow of the towering crystal spire, her chest heaving from exertion. Sweat drenched her tattered flight suit, and her hands trembled as she focused on drawing energy from the atmosphere around her. The faint, glowing particles in the air coalesced, swirling into her palms in tiny threads of light. She felt the hum of power growing stronger, but it still eluded her control. Zephyr loomed nearby, his sapphire scales darkened to a muted blue. His luminous eyes watched her intently, offering silent judgment. Again, his voice resonated in her mind, steady but firm. "I can't," Alyssa snapped, frustration boiling over. She let the energy dissipate, collapsing against the base of the spire. "I've been doing this for days, and it's not enough. I can feel it. It's like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a piece of string." Zephyr approached, his massive form casting a long shadow over her. The vibrations in the air shifted, carrying an undertone of compassion. "The Voidborn is not bound by time or patience. It will not wait for you to feel ready. It will come, and you must stand against it." Alyssa clenched her fists, fighting the urge to lash out. "You're asking me to fight something that's older than your planet. Something that can devour light itself. How am I supposed to beat that?" Zephyr's head dipped slightly, his glowing eyes softening. "Because you are not alone." The Draker gathered that evening in a massive clearing where the ground was carved with ancient symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light. The entire forest seemed to hold its breath as the Guardians prepared for the coming storm. Alyssa stood at the edge of the gathering, feeling out of place despite everything she had learned. The other Draker moved with practiced precision, their scales shimmering as they coordinated their efforts to fortify the planet's defenses. Zephyr approached her, his towering form radiating a quiet strength. Beside him was the ruby-scaled Draker, whom Alyssa had named Ember. Ember had become her closest ally among the Draker, often staying by her side during training and offering subtle encouragement when her confidence faltered. Zephyr spoke, his voice resonating with a deep gravity. "The Voidborn's presence grows stronger. It seeps into the heart of Dracoris, corrupting the land. We have fortified the planet's core for millennia, but the defenses are weakening. The time has come to confront it directly." Alyssa's stomach churned. "You mean, now?" Zephyr's glowing eyes bore into hers. "Tomorrow. At dawn. The convergence lies deep within the planet's core. It is there the Voidborn will manifest fully. If we fail to stop it there, all will be lost." That night, Alyssa found herself unable to sleep. The weight of the coming battle pressed down on her like an iron shroud. She sat by the glowing stream where she and Zephyr had spoken days before, staring into the dim, rippling light. Ember appeared silently, her red scales reflecting faintly in the water. She lowered her head, nudging Alyssa gently. "You're worried," Alyssa said, running a hand along the smooth, warm surface of Ember's scales. "I am too. I'm not even sure I'm strong enough to make a difference." Ember let out a soft, melodic hum. The vibrations carried a message that Alyssa had come to interpret as reassurance. Strength isn't just power. It's choosing to fight, even when you're afraid. Alyssa smiled faintly. I think you're better at pep talks than Zephyr. The Ruby Draker tilted her head, letting out a low trill that Alyssa interpreted as amusement. But the moment was short-lived. A sharp tremor rippled through the ground, and a cold wind swept through the clearing. The light from the stream flickered and dimmed. Alyssa shot to her feet, her heart racing. It's starting, isn't it? Ember's scales flared briefly, a warning glow. The hum of her energy carried a single, unmistakable word, yes. At dawn, the sky over Dracoris was black, not with clouds, but with an oppressive shadow that seemed to blot out the sun itself. The air was electric, vibrating with a tension that set every nerve in Alyssa's body on edge. The Draker had assembled in formation, their ranks glowing faintly in the darkness. Zephyr stood at the forefront, his massive wings unfurled, his scales shimmering with barely contained power. Alyssa joined him, her armor crafted from Draker scales fitting awkwardly but offering a sense of security. She gripped a spear-like weapon forged from the same crystalline energy as the planet's core. It hummed faintly in her hands, responding to her touch. The convergence lies below, Zephyr said, gesturing toward a massive chasm that had opened in the ground. The Voidborn will emerge there. We must meet it with all our strength. Alyssa nodded, swallowing her fear. What happens if we lose? Zephyr's gaze turned solemn. If we fall, the Voidborn will consume Dracoris. Then it will spread to the stars, leaving only emptiness in its wake. Your kind, my kind, everything will cease to exist. No pressure, Alyssa thought grimly. The ground trembled again, more violently this time. The chasm began to glow with a sickly, pulsating light as tendrils of shadow slithered upward, reaching for the surface. A deep, resonant roar echoed from the depths, shaking the very air. Zephyr unfurled his wings, letting out a piercing cry that rallied the Draker. They took to the skies, their luminous forms cutting through the darkness like shooting stars. Alyssa followed, gripping her weapon tightly as she leapt into the chasm alongside them. As they descended into the depths of Dracoris, Alyssa felt the weight of the Voidborn's presence growing stronger. It was a suffocating, all-encompassing force that clawed at her mind, whispering doubts and fears. But she pushed forward, drawing strength from the light within her and the presence of the Draker by her side. At the core of the planet, the Voidborn began to take shape, a massive, shifting mass of shadow and malevolence, its tendrils writhing and lashing out. The air was thick with its power, and its voice boomed in Alyssa's mind. You are nothing. You cannot stop me. All will return to the void. Alyssa gritted her teeth, stepping forward alongside Zephyr and Ember. Her hands tightened around her weapon, and she felt the light within her pulse in defiance. We'll see about that, she whispered, and the battle began. The convergence, the heart of Dracoris, was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Alyssa stood on a jagged outcrop overlooking the planet's core, a massive sphere of pulsating light encased in intricate crystalline patterns. Around it, rivers of molten energy flowed in intricate loops, feeding life into the planet above. But now, those rivers were tainted, streaked with writhing shadows that bled into the light. The Voidborn's form dominated the cavernous space. It was an amorphous mass of shifting blackness, its tendrils reaching hungrily for the core. It pulsed and swelled, a void so complete that it seemed to devour not just light, but sound and hope itself. The Draker flew in formation around it, their radiant forms striking at its appendages, but for every tendril severed, two more grew in its place. Alyssa gripped her crystalline spear tightly, the weapon buzzing with latent energy. She stood shoulder to shoulder with Zephyr and Ember, the Draker guardians who had guided her to this moment. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to back down. The Voidborn's voice echoed in her mind, a cold, alien whisper. You cannot win. You are a spark in the abyss. I am eternal. Maybe, she muttered under her breath, but sparks can start fires. Zephyr let out a piercing roar, signaling the Draker to begin a coordinated assault. They dived at the Voidborn, their claws and tails cutting through its shadowy tendrils, their radiant scales burning its darkness like fire against dry leaves. Ember stayed close to Alyssa, her ruby glow a comforting presence amidst the chaos. Alyssa took a deep breath and charged, her spear humming with power as she thrust it into a writhing tendril. The weapon pierced the shadow, sending a shockwave of energy rippling outward. The Voidborn recoiled, a deafening roar echoing through the chamber. It struck back with terrifying speed. A massive tendril lashed out, slamming into the ground near Alyssa and sending her flying. She hit the rocky surface hard, the impact knocking the wind out of her. Gasping, she rolled onto her side just in time to see Ember leap in front of her, intercepting another tendril with a fiery blast of energy. "Thanks," Alyssa panted, pushing herself to her feet. Ember nudged her with a low trill before taking to the air again, joining the fight. The battle raged on, but the Voidborn seemed unending. Every attack by the Draker chipped away at its form, but it regenerated faster than they could destroy it. The planet's core pulsed erratically, its light growing dimmer with each passing moment. Alyssa realized the truth: the Voidborn wasn't just attacking the core. It was siphoning its energy, using the very lifeblood of Dracoris to fuel its regeneration. If they didn't act quickly, the planet and everyone on it would be consumed. Zephyr landed beside her, his sapphire scales dulled with exhaustion. "The Voidborn is feeding on the core," he said, his resonant voice heavy with urgency. "We cannot stop it with strength alone. The light must be focused." Alyssa's brow furrowed. "Focused? How?" "The convergence amplifies energy," Zephyr explained. "It is why the Voidborn came here. You must channel your light into the core. Use it to sever the Voidborn's bond." Alyssa's stomach dropped. "Me? I don't know how to do that. I've barely scratched the surface of what I'm capable of." Zephyr lowered his head, his glowing eyes meeting hers. "You are the bridge. Light and shadow converge within you. Only you can wield both. Trust yourself." Alyssa hesitated, fear gripping her heart. She could feel the Voidborn's presence pressing against her mind, a suffocating weight that made her doubt everything she had learned. But as she looked around the Draker fighting valiantly, the core struggling to hold on, the very essence of the planet dimming, she knew she couldn't let fear control her. "I'll try," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. She turned toward the core, gripping her spear tightly. The crystalline weapon pulsed in her hands, resonating with the energy of the convergence. She stepped forward, the ground trembling beneath her feet. As she approached the core, tendrils of light reached out to her, wrapping around her arms and legs. They didn't hurt, instead, they filled her with warmth and an overwhelming sense of connection. She felt the heartbeat of Dracoris, the rhythm of its life force, and the pain of its struggle. The Voidborn must have sensed her intent, for its tendrils lashed out toward her. Before they could reach her, Ember and Zephyr intercepted them, their radiant forms shielding her from the attack. Alyssa closed her eyes, focusing on the light within her. She reached deep into herself, to the place where light and shadow intertwined. The darkness she had feared, the mark left by the Voidborn, was still there, but now she saw it for what it was, a part of her, but not her enemy. It was a tool, a balance to the light. She began to channel the energy of the convergence, drawing power from the core and amplifying it with her own. The spear in her hands glowed brighter and brighter until it was almost too much to bear. "Now!" Zephyr roared. "Strike!" Alyssa thrust the spear into the core, releasing the energy in a blinding explosion of light. The force of it shook the entire chamber, sending shockwaves rippling outward. The Voidborn let out an ear-splitting roar as the connection between it and the core was severed. Its tendrils writhed and dissolved, its form shrinking as the light consumed it. But the battle wasn't over. The Voidborn's essence surged toward Alyssa, a desperate attempt to survive. She stood her ground, channeling the light through her body, pushing back against the overwhelming darkness. "You don't belong here," she whispered, her voice filled with defiance. This is not your place. With a final surge of energy, she unleashed everything she had. The Voidborn's form shattered, its pieces dissolving into the ether. The chamber fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting as the light of the core grew steady and strong once more. The Draker landed around her, their scales gleaming with renewed vitality. Zephyr approached, lowering his head in a gesture of respect. "You have done what we could not," he said. "You have brought balance." Alyssa swayed on her feet, exhaustion threatening to pull her under. Ember pressed against her side, steadying her with a soft trill. "Is it gone?" Alyssa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zephyr nodded. "For now. But the Voidborn is not easily destroyed. It will seek another place, another time. Yet, because of you, it will not take Dracoris." Alyssa nodded, relief washing over her. She looked up at the glowing core, its light now pure and steady, and felt a deep sense of connection to the planet. She was no longer just a visitor. She was a part of Dracoris now, a guardian in her own right. Epilogue: The Lightkeeper. Days turned into weeks as Dracoris healed. The forests began to glow brightly once more, and the rivers of energy flowed untainted. The Draker resumed their watchful guardianship, but now they had a new ally among them.